Thank you.
Good to be
Juliana,
here.
are you tired, Juliana? You just spoke at 5 o'clock.
No way, I eat plants. I've got lots of energy.
Okay, great. So thank you both for joining us again. Um, so my first question is, when people come to you, both of you, and they say, I eat a whole food plant-based diet, just like you told me, but my blood sugar is still between 100 and 125. What do you tell them to do to get it lower? What advice do you have for them?
Well, first of all, people may be eating a healthy diet today, but there's sometimes a cumulative damage that takes a while to unwind. So one thing you always want to know is how close to optimum weight is a person. If they have excess fat, that means they're going to have excess visceral fat. If they have excess visceral fat, they're going to have inflammation that's interfering with all kinds of functions in their body. So first question is, have they done it long enough to achieve optimum weight? Second of all, even assuming they're eating a whole plant food SOS-free diet, in which, it's a big assumption because a lot of people are vegan, but there's a lot of things that are vegan that aren't necessarily healthy. But assuming that they are on a whole plant food diet and they are avoiding salt, oil, and sugar, remember there's other factors that affect blood sugar levels, including exercise. So people that engage in regular aerobic exercise do better than people that don't. Sleep quality can be a profound influence, as can stress and stress management. Being under constant stress isn't always a good thing. And particularly nowadays, especially with the internet and the communication systems we have, you can spend your whole day worrying about the worst possible things that ever happened to anybody on the planet and kind of bathe in that all day long. And so we recommend that they, develop stress management strategies to try to avoid the other variables that might be throwing off their sugar. And if, in fact, they're doing all those things well, but they're still reluctant or resistant, then what we do is we bring them to True North Health Center and put them on a medically supervised water-only fast until the insulin resistance is resolved, and then go back and do exactly the same things, and normally that'll work well.
Thank you. And does a water fast always resolve blood sugar issues? Like on day 20 of a water fast, is everyone's fasting blood sugar resolved? Is that
No, I mean, I've had patients day 20 still have significantly elevated blood sugar levels. In fact, some patients, it'll be the second or third fast before you really get normal blood sugar levels. Again, it depends how fat a person is, how much visceral fat they have, how much insulin resistance, what other concomitant disease there is. Some people have spent years or decades accumulating their disease. They don't necessarily resolve everything in 20 days.
Got it. If you had to bet all your money, what do you know 100% for sure? I know there's a lot of things that we might know 90 or 95, but at this point, what can we say is absolutely certain that you could say? There's a lot of things to debate and discuss and argue, but when it comes to health and disease prevention, what are the things that we could say this is not negotiable anymore? This is absolute. You'd bet everything on it.
That's such a great question. And I like to say that there's nothing absolute in science except that nothing's absolute. And except that if you look at the trends and you look at what stays true over the test of time, certain things ring and are very well substantiated, keep getting validated over and over and over again. One thing is we know for sure that ultra-processed foods promote disease. We know that high animal product consumption or animal product consumption promotes disease. We know that diet is the #1 cause of early death and disability. We know that, all the other factors are really important, but diet really matters first. We know that fruits and vegetables are the most health promoting foods and we need to consume them. And we know that, sometimes it's just listening to the very simple things that are the most effective and getting caught up in all of the hype because there's so much noise out there, especially now with social media, that sometimes it's better to just go back to the basics and stay simple.
Thank you.
So, we know that health has causes, just like disease has causes. And that if you want to be healthy, you have to do the things that cause health. And that includes diet, sleep, and exercise. And, we believe that a whole plant food SOS-free diet is the diet most likely to result in health for the majority of patients. But there's obviously going to be variations individually within even the limits of that. and that sleep and exercise are critical components that are often underestimated. Honestly, though, most patients that adopt a whole plant food SOS-free diet, get regular exercise and sleep, end up being healthy and happy, and they don't have a lot of time to worry about all the fine details.
Thank you. What is the best data on what to do to prevent bone problems like osteoporosis and arthritis?
The most important thing for bone health is really exercise and stimulating the bones and having, resistance exercise on a regular basis. And that's something that gets lost a lot, but it's number one most important. And then, of course, a diet that's supporting that, you're not having all these products that are leaching from the bones. You're making sure that you're getting enough of your vitamin D is a healthy level, your serum levels of vitamin D, you're getting enough fruits and vegetables. You are not consuming all this. It's all the same. It's always like a one size fits all approach to all of these things. But number one is providing resistance onto your muscles on a regular basis, on your bones on a regular basis, and eating a diet that supports it. There's all these other nutrients that come into play. You want to make sure you have vitamin B12, you're taking your B12, you're taking, you're getting some vitamin K and getting all your leafy green vegetables. There's all these other nutrients that come into play because it's such an incredibly diverse mechanism of action by which we keep the bone metabolism in its optimal levels. But it's eating a health promoting diet, making sure you're getting the proper supplements that you need, and most importantly, that you're persistently doing resistance exercise.
So I agree with all of that. In addition to doing the things that support bone health and including exercise and diet, it's also about not doing the things that tend to compromise bone health. And so the sodas, the caffeinated beverages, the meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products, all the high sulfur amino acids, basically the standard American diet.
Is there anything from the whole food plant-based world that's bad for my bones?
Well, too much of anything, I guess too much water is called drowning. So I imagine you can overdo just about anything, but it's a lot harder on a whole plant food SOS-free diet to do things that would be, health compromising. You'd really have, because part of the way is normal satiety mechanisms kick in. So it makes it more difficult to overdo on healthful substances where it's almost inevitable on non-healthful substances. And a lot of people don't even think about things like salt and the role that it can contribute to osteoporosis. You wouldn't normally, why would sodium be contributing? But it turns out, it can have powerful leaching influences, not to mention stimulating passive overeating. And also it allows you to eat things that you wouldn't normally eat or you wouldn't eat as much of. And as a consequence, even something without any calories like salt can make people fat and sick and contribute to osteoporosis.
You say no salt. When people talk about Bragg's liquid amino, Namo shoyu, coconut aminos, even kelp, do you mean, is that a solution or is that the same thing?
Well, I mean, it's called let's pretend, so we take it in the form of tamari or we take it in the form of hidden somewhere else. But ultimately what I'm talking about is, sodium chloride. So sodium chloride in any of its forms done excessively is going to be a problem.
Is there sodium chloride in all those things?
Yes.
What about kelp?
Well, kelp is a substance that, it can also be, very concentrated. There are ways of processing vegetable foods, if you're going to include those in the diet, to minimize the excess sodium intake. And it's also maybe a quantitative issue if you're going to use sea vegetables. You just want to be aware of the potential downsides, particularly if you use them excessively.
Okay.
There's salt in
but kelp
everything.
at least is, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, finish.
I was just going to say kelp at least is a whole plant food versus, a highly processed, concoction that we use to pretend like the excess sodium in it isn't going to be detrimental.
Thank you.
People forget that there's salt in everything. There's salt in regular whole foods. There's salt in celery. Celery is actually very salty. And so you can get plenty of salt. All these people are running around like touting that we need more salt, but we don't. We get plenty of it just from eating a healthy diet, let alone the processed foods, which contribute, I think, up to 60 or 75% of the total sodium intake in the American diet. So we're getting plenty of salt just regularly. And, you want to minimize, you really want to try to keep it under 15, not that I recommend anyone counts, but ideally we're keeping it under 1,500 milligrams a day total, including all of those whole foods. So anything you add on top of that is just going to boost up your levels.
If you look at something like a tomato sauce, a tomato sauce that you make yourself out of tomatoes and vegetables and herbs and stuff is going to have, 10 or 20 milligrams of sodium per serving. You go and buy almost any commercial tomato sauce, and you'll have from 400 to 700 milligrams of serving. It's massively more than what you would find naturally. You get all the carbohydrate you need from whole foods. You get all the protein you need from whole foods. You get all the sodium you need from whole foods. You just need to eat a whole plant food diet. You don't need to add fractionated chemicals in the form of salt, oil, and sugar in order to be able to get the quantity and quality of nutrients that you need.
Thank you. By the way, I don't know, is your age a secret? Like, is it appropriate to ask your age, or is that something that you'd rather just, just not be discussed?
I just turned 65. My grandson, who just is going to Davis now, he's in college. He calls me the AO. It stands for the Ancient One. I was playing basketball last week with a kid. He was around 18 years old, and we got to talking a little bit afterwards, and he said, "Yeah, you're older than my grandfather."
Ouch. But look at you.
Well, you look great for 65. Absolutely.
There we go.
Age. We're going to keep yours a secret, Julie.
Oh, no, I don't. Well, I have a birthday coming up in 4 days, and it's my last year of my 40th decade. Oh my God. So I will be 49.
You're starting the second half.
Yeah.
And do you believe that you've had good genetics, or do you believe your lifestyle has had an effect on how you've aged?
Yes. But I mean, I really do believe that, genetics are great and everything, but we know diet and lifestyle pull the trigger. And, I work hard to take care of myself. And I think that you see I feel different. I feel healthier now than I did in my 20s by far.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, here I lost my thought for 1 second. Sorry. Okay. Should beans be the center of our diet, and do they need to be soaked first or sprouted? And then while you're answering if beans should be the center of our diet and do they need to be soaked or sprouted, also, how do you feel about potatoes and corn as a significant part of our diet?
Well, I just gave that talk on health span, and the only one food group that all blue zones have in common are legumes. So all the beans, lentils, peas, soy foods like tofu and tempeh, and I always say hummus should be a food group, should be the cornerstone for a healthy diet. But again, you don't want to eat all of one food. You want to have a nice variety of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, mushrooms, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices in infinite tasty combinations. But if you're eating legumes, about 1.5 cups a day should give you all the nutrients that you need. And it's just a great, versatile, delicious, health promoting food.
Everywhere I've traveled in the world, and I do a lot of it because of my wife is a bit of an adventure travel. She's a photographer and likes to go to places. In fact, she has a list of all the places in the world where there's no cell reception. And that seems to be where she's always taking me. They eat the same thing. Any non-industrialized country, it's rice and beans, rice and beans, rice and beans, except on the weekends, then for variety, they often have beans and rice. But the reason for that, though, is pretty simple. The lowest cost per calorie, the most reliable, easiest to grow, best staple foods are grains and beans. Grains and beans provide lots of nutrition, lots of calories. They're economical, and you have, a big part of the world that makes less than $5 a day equivalent. And so when you have limited resources, you eat what you can afford, and rice and beans are highly nutritious, cost-effective foods. Fruits and vegetables per calorie, if you figure it out, it's like 10 times as much. So trying to make a diet only out of, say, fruits and vegetables would be proportionally a much more expensive, way to eat in terms of cost per calories. We can do that, and we recommend that. Dominating, fresh fruit and vegetables is a major volume component of the diet. But as far as caloric density, it's really hard to beat the value that rice and beans and starchy vegetables add.
So how about corn, potatoes, and squashes?
Wait, and
these are all staples. Sorry.
Yeah. No, just to add to what you're saying is that you can I've done a video series where you could take a bowl of rice and beans and completely transform it to have any kind of flavor profile you like. I did a Japanese version and a Mexican version and an Indian version, and they taste amazing. So you can take this very versatile, very cost-effective, which is a very excellent point, nutritious staple food group, and you could turn it into anything you like to meet your palate. So it's really versatile and delicious. And what were you asking about, corn and potatoes?
Corn, potatoes, and squash.
definitely fabulous staple foods and very satisfying. Potatoes are known as the most satisfying food, scientifically speaking. And, you know, with my clients, they do so much weight loss. The more potatoes people eat, the more they lose weight. So those are wonderful, delicious, versatile staples that you could do a million delicious things with as well.
And what's nice is you can actually live healthily on any one or any combination of these variables. So if you're in a fortunate position to have a variety of them, that's probably the best. However, let's say you're sensitive to lectins, or you have a problem with digesting beans, or you can eliminate entire classes of those foods and just eat more of the other stuff and still be thriving and healthy and happy. So, you know, people should, you know, they can pay attention to their own body. And even people that might have limitations, for example, with beans, may find by changing how they prepare the beans, like soaking them, by boiling them, draining, using a pressure cooker, various techniques, they may find that they can make those beans digestible to them, even though maybe, you know, previously they thought they weren't able to handle them. Some people can handle things once a week, but they may not be able to handle it every day. So being able to have the luxury of having a variety of staple starches in the diet is often a really good strategy for people that have sensitive digestive systems.
It seems like squashes have a bad PR department. I go to a farmer's market and they have these big local organic squashes, and they seem like this unbelievably satisfying, healthy food, but doesn't seem like we talk about them. It just seems like they're much lower profile than other foods. But are you saying, I guess that's just my experience, but are you saying that squashes could be a very mainstream part of getting filled up and a big part of the whole food plant-based diet?
Here's a hack for everyone out there that's intimidated by squashes. I was one of those people because I can't cut things without chopping off my fingers. I'm very klutzy. So if I could do it, anyone could do it. So I learned this hack where I take squash because I love it and I will throw it in the oven just whole. I wash it really well and I just cook it. I don't try to, I don't have to risk my fingers. And then it comes out. I mean, the other day I had an entire kabocha squash for lunch. It was amazing. It was so good. Maybe I add a little hot sauce, low sodium, but it was so delicious. They're so easy to make and they're so versatile. So yeah, they're definitely getting a bad rap if that's what you're seeing.
And there's no day that goes by that squashes, some variety of the squashes, aren't served at the True North Health Center. In fact, they're one of the most valuable foods clinically because you can get a variety of starches that almost nobody has developed repetitive exposure allergies to. And so that it's a way of putting tremendous variety in the diet of people with gut leakage issues and other problems. It's also foods that are well tolerated even by, say, infants. And when you think about, what would you feed an infant, you oftentimes come up with the foods that are going to be well handled by people with digestive sensitivities. And so between butternut, witternut, kombucha, they're easy to grow. They're very cost effective. You can make them in a variety of different ways, and they provide high quality of nutrient dense, calorically lower food. So I think they should be a staple in the diet.
You mentioned the word lectins. Now, over the years, there are authors that have written about lectins, phytates, oxalates, and the people who write them, I don't know, they write books. They seem like credible people who write good books. In your real world experience, are people having health problems from lectins, phytates, oxalates? What do we need to know about these three things?
So there are patients that have sensitivities to just about anything. You'll find people even with very serious allergies to, say, the powder on mangoes or, citrus fruit, or any whole food has various chemical components that will be somebody out there that's sensitive to. And those people that are sensitive to whatever the components are decide everybody's sensitive to it, write books, and do really well. The reality is most of the associations or errors of attribution, they'll blame one class of food for all that ails them, when really that's just a component of the overall diet integrity. So if you happen to be sensitive to certain proteins, then just avoid those proteins and eat the foods that aren't dominant in those foods until you get healthy enough that you can probably rotate foods back in, and it may not be a big issue. Also, again, you may be sensitive to some things that you eat every single day, whereas if you just rotate your diet a little bit more, you may find you have a little bit less immunological sensitivity. Honestly, most of the people that come in, once you get them fasted, get rid of their gut leakage, they can handle a variety of whole plant foods without a big problem. And if they do have a problem, it really isn't that big of a deal just to exclude the foods they're sensitive to.
I see the same things. Absolutely. And it is so funny how we're trying to generalize it and you really can't. And there are people that are sensitive to all sorts of things, but I don't see people coming to me because they've eaten too many lectins and that's why they're dealing with chronic disease, or they're eating too many, phytates. I mean, these are things that are just part of whole foods. And I love the way you said that. That's like just the perfect way to sum it up, is that if you are sensitive, then take it out. And everyone I see that comes to me with these massive lab panels of what they're allergic to, it's always the foods they eat predominantly. And then you shift it out and it's amazing how all of a sudden you can bring those back in and be okay. So it's good to hear that you're seeing that as well, because that's an anecdotal type of finding from my
The
end.
problem is when people have oxidative damage secondary to pro-inflammatory foods, so particularly meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products, oil, salt, and sugar, one of the problems that happens is the matrix in their gut widens and they can leak in chemicals that stimulate the immune response. We have the luxury with fasting patients to allow that to heal. And then when you rotate foods in, you can identify very clearly if they actually do have sensitivity. And there are patients that have particular sensitivities. It's usually relatively easy to identify. And, they may not like getting rid of those foods because often the foods they're allergic to are the ones that they've been over consuming for years and years and years. And so they have to make dietary changes until such time as they can adapt. And another example is sometimes it's the concentration of foods. They might be able to eat fresh tomatoes, but you give them a bunch of tomato sauce where, massive amount of acid concentrated in a small space, they may have some sensitivity that you and I may not.
Do any of us have to worry if at lunch and dinner we have lots of green vegetables and lots of sprouts raw? Is that ever a concern that we'll have too many oxalates and that'll cause some kind of health issue, as Sally Norton in her book Toxic Superfoods pointed out?
As long as you're not getting involved in heavy juicing and stuff, it's very unlikely that the normal large volumes of fresh fruit and vegetables is going to be a dominant problem for any significant number of people. When you start juicing, now you get a situation where you can get an abnormally large amount of a substance. And I'm sure there are people that are sensitive, say, to oxalic acid. If you juiced enough spinach juice and you gave them enough of it, they would have negative reactions. But again, if people just pay attention to how they're feeling, they can identify the foods that they do well with, the foods that they don't do as well with, or the foods that they don't do well at all with, and just set up their diet accordingly. Fortunately, there's so much variety of whole natural foods that it's not usually that difficult to identify a few dozen things that you can incorporate in your routine diet.
And just to add to that, that's so well said, but I love to tell people just to mix it up. And that's an argument for variety. And so, there's certain greens that are higher in oxalates like spinach. And so then or chard. So you want to just make sure you're getting different types of greens or get them from a different location. Or like I was explaining in my talk about nuts and seeds, I love to make cashew sauces, but because all the other nutrients and different nuts and seeds have different benefits, just mix it up. And so just having some variety of where you get it, the source, and the different types within that category of food will give you less of an opportunity to have a concentration of whatever compound that you may find there, including oxalates or phytates or whatever.
You have to ask, say, why are they sensitive to oxalate or phytates or lectins or whatever it is? And usually it goes back to that they've got an inflamed gut, that they're absorbing materials that normally would be filtered by a healthy intestinal mucosa. And why is that happening? It has nothing to do with necessarily those foods. It may be secondary to the damage that's being caused by animal foods and fried foods and all the other things that are sources of our oxidative damage.
So would the water fasting go a long way to healing this problem?
For a lot of people, it's kind of like you have a corrupted hard drive in a computer and your computer's not working. You just shut the whole thing off, you turn it on, you don't know why, but now it starts working again because it's rebooted the hard drive. And I would use that as an analogy. When you turn everything off in fasting, you get a big die-off in the gut microbiome, then you start feeding whole plant foods, you regrow the type of bacteria that's supposed to be in the gut, rather than the type of bacteria you find in the guts of meat eaters and people eating refined carbohydrates. So, you can kind of recalibrate that whole system. And for some people, a single fast with healthy re-eating is enough to solve the problem. And other people, it can take a long time depending on how much damage has been done.
And if after this conference is over, someone says, I really want to reboot, and they're unable, and your best suggestion is to come to your facility. If they can't come to your facility, will you guide them over Zoom on a home fast?
Well, what we would recommend for people that want to do, say, home fasting is they still have to go through a process of making sure are they a good candidate for fasting. We can do that without cost to the patient. They go onto the website at truenorthhealth.com, complete the registration forms, and I'll talk to them on the phone about that and be for no cost to just say, is this something that you should be considering? If it is, and they want to come to the center or one of the other places that supervise it, that's fine. If they want to do it at home, we have a telemedicine practice where doctors that are experienced with fasting can work with their local doctor to make sure that history exam lab is done, that they do it properly. You still have to rest. You still have to do it properly if you want to have a good outcome. So and that's assuming that, they have conditions that will lend themselves to that. Some people are sick enough or they're on medications, there's going to be more medical management than can be done at home. We would recommend those people fast under supervision. But, many people can successfully do fasting or modified fasting on their own, as long as they're a good candidate for it and they have appropriate rest and supervision during the time they're doing it. And more doctors are becoming open to this. Many of the doctors we see who are at first skeptical, once they see a patient or two get well, they're all enthusiastic, because for most doctors, they never see people get well. It's not even part of the paradigm. They tell people, oh, you'll be on these drugs the rest of your life. You'll never get well, because they've never experienced that process in using conventional therapies.
And how long for a home fast does it normally last? I know it's different for each person, but what's the range of the shortest to longest and the average?
Well, in some cases, it's not doing water fasting. It's doing a modified, juices, broths, other things like that. So they're on limited calories. It's less complicated. You don't have the same medication management complications. Other people, they may fast for a few days to a few weeks, depending on what it takes. But that's really something that's best kind of determined individually, because it depends on medication issues, health history, their capacity, and also their environment. Some people are in very supportive environments that would lend themselves to, getting rest and doing it. Other people are raising children and have teenagers and have all kinds of stresses that would make it very difficult to get the kind of rest that's necessary with fasting. So that's why we offer that service, though, where we'll review their history and give them some advice about what would be the best strategy for them and point them in the direction that might make most practical sense for them to do it.
Okay. Are all whole grains good for us, or should we just eat quinoa, millet, amaranth, teff, buckwheat, and wild rice, and avoid grains with gluten like wheat, barley, and oats?
Well, if you are celiac, then you definitely need to avoid anything with gluten in it. That is the most important. That is the one, group that really does need to avoid it, or someone that has an allergy or an intolerance too. But I don't recommend people avoid whole food groups, especially like that. Gluten is a really hard one to avoid if you don't need to, and if you're getting it from whole food sources. What I talk about is the fact that when people they say, oh, I cut out gluten, I feel so good, like someone in the population. Well, that's because they're cutting out all these processed foods because they're having to pay attention to it. And of course they feel good. But if someone really thinks that that's what's happening, I have them just get off of all of that. You don't have anything with gluten in it. Give yourself a couple of weeks, don't have it at all. And then sit there on its own after not eating before, have a bowl of barley, like a whole grain gluten. And if you don't respond to it, you're probably fine. So that's kind of like the test that I usually do. But eating a wide variety of whole grains is a really health promoting decision across the world.
So, nowadays, as Julie mentioned, that wheat is largely served as a highly refined, highly processed carbohydrate served with oil and salt. For example, bread is normally associated with oil, salt, and sugar. In fact, if you take the salt and the oil away from bread, it's called matzah, and it's punishment on Passover. It's not something that people are necessarily going out of their way of eating. It's kind of like meat. When you take away the salt and the sauces, boiled beef isn't something people are all getting excited to line up at the drive-through to get. So I think that that's one issue. The other thing is that the HLA-DQ gene that's associated with gluten sensitivity is also associated with Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So it's not just celiac disease that might be associated with wheat, but there's also a theory that people that are wheat sensitive and their immune system doesn't necessarily attack their intestinal tract, i.e. celiac disease, but it may attack the thyroid, i.e. Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And so that, there may be other diseases and sensitivities associated with gluten sensitivity. And the gluten that we get exposed to through wheat today bears little resemblance to the concentration of gluten that would be present in the old non-hybridized grains. Now they get, I think, 10 times as much grain per acre. It's, the stuff doesn't float around in the wind. It stands up straight. It's good for harvesting. And they've genetically modified it to a significant extent that may make it more of a potential digestive challenge than perhaps, kamut or some of the old style ancient grains. So if you're not sensitive to it, maybe it doesn't matter, but you still probably don't want to eat all those flour-based products. People are not getting wheat berries, boiling them and eating them because it's kind of disgusting. It's not a great grain in that regard. So that, again, maybe errors of attribution. It may be legitimate genetic sensitivities, or it may be just that if you get rid of the wheat, you also get rid of an awful lot of the flours and the cookies and the crackers and all the other stuff with all the other things in it that are causing problems.
In the context of candida overgrowth and its associated cognitive symptoms such as brain fog, could you share any strategies for effective management and eradication of this condition? Please discuss the role of dietary change, the inclusion of probiotics, lifestyle adjustments, and any other pertinent therapies in enhancing overall well-being and mental clarity.
Okay, so Candida is a normal yeast form. It's present in everybody. It overgrows when the immune system is suppressed. One of the things that suppresses the immune system is sleep deprivation, high sugar diets, eating highly processed, crappy foods, not taking care of business. What we do with people that have chronic candidiasis, we fast them till the system reboots, get rid of the gut leakage, put them on a whole plant food diet, and inevitably the problem resolves. The bigger problem is people that have been on medications for a long time and all the consequences that come from their medication. So I don't see candidiasis as being, in its various forms, as necessarily being an overwhelmingly challenging problem to resolve if you can get people to do dangerous and radical things like eat well and exercise and go to bed on time and do those kinds of interventions. There are other microbial imbalances that may be even more challenging, but again, our approach is very similar. We try to avoid medications whenever possible, do it through fasting and dietary change, and allow the body to try to heal itself.
Julieanna, anything on that?
No, I don't really test for that normally, and I don't really deal with that per se exactly. So, but I would always default to something like what you're saying, Dr. Goldhamer.
Okay. What do you say to a woman who is postmenopausal and says she has low libido, painful sex, brain fog, and weight gain? Would you recommend she goes on hormone replacement therapy? How about bioidentical hormone replacement?
Well, this is not my expertise, except that most of my clients are perimenopausal. So I could talk from that perspective, but I do not, obviously I don't prescribe hormones. I'm not a physician, and I've seen people at various stages. I've watched people go through hormone replacement, come from hormone replacement, wanting to start hormone replacement. What I've seen very consistently, this is anecdote, and there's some science to support it, but like when you switch your diet and you're switching your lifestyle, because a lot of people are coming to me with really, a lot of issues in their lifestyle and their diet and the way they're living their life. They're very stressed out. They're not, usually moms and grandmas and dealing with, busy work and all that. And when you start to look at everything, and you start to analyze their diet, you start to look at their lifestyle. When you make the same changes that we're suggesting across the board, again, one size fits all, it really is. It sounds it's a boring answer, but it's the truth. It's a one size fits all approach. People get better. And I mean, I've walked many, many women through menopause asymptomatically. They don't even realize it. And, you can only define menopause as a no period for a year. So there's some people that are like, oh yeah, I'm menopausal. And I didn't even realize the transition was so easy because their diet and lifestyle was put into place. The people that come to me that are really struggling with it, that are dealing with hot flashes and awful, it's awful. I mean, I've dealt with I've seen this so many, I can empathize as a woman at that age. It can be really awful. And lifestyle is so powerful. Diet is so powerful. But like I said in the talk too, is that there's two sides to the coin. It's one same coin. It's what you are eating and what you're not eating. What you are getting from your diet and what you're not getting from your diet. And it's both things have advantages. It's not getting all of those other things, the animal products, the processed foods, the sugar, SOS, all those things that are contributing to the symptoms and the proliferation of those symptoms and the aggravation of that journey. And it's not getting all those wonderful things, the fiber and the phytonutrients and all the things that we need to promote, health and to help our body stay out of the body's way. That saying that when left alone, the body will heal itself, which is obviously the whole premise of all the stuff you're doing with this fasting. it's just, it's so incredibly powerful what you can do with the diet. So I wouldn't change my recommendations, maybe add some soy foods for someone that hasn't been, but taking away and changing the diet from a standard Western diet can do leaps and bounds amazing things for women going through menopause.
So there's an active hormone called estradiol, which is a dominant female hormone. When it gets too much, there are certain symptoms associated with that state, and that's like fibrocystic breast disease, dysmenorrhea, menorrhagia, so heavy periods, disrupted periods, breast tenderness, polycystic ovarian syndrome. There's this whole class of common symptoms that are also just associated with this elevated estradiol. Well, estradiol normally gets broken down to something called estriol, and you get rid of it in the urine. And what breaks it down are the bacteria that live in your gut. So if your gut microbiome is disrupted, you may not be breaking down the estradiol preferentially to estriol for excretion, and it may accumulate. So when we have patients that come in with those symptoms, and we fast them and then put them on a whole plant food diet, inevitably there's a dramatic improvement. People that have been having terrible problems with hot flashes and other stuff, oftentimes post-fasting stop having those problems. So we don't know because the research isn't there yet. We haven't actually published on this particular pathway and mechanism, but I suspect that that's where we're going to fall. And this may just be one of several pathways that's activated by diet and lifestyle change, but that's one, at least there seems to correlate very strongly.
It keeps coming back to the microbiome, the dysbiosis. It's unbelievable what we're learning. I was talking about that too today. It's very exciting.
If you took, say you have a 150-pound human being, and you pulled out all their human cells and put them in a pile, and then pulled out all their non-human cells, the fungi, the bacteria, the protozoa, there's actually more non-human cells making up a body than human cells. So our relationship with these organisms is very important because they can either produce nasty toxic waste like TMA, which is trimethylamine oxidase, which causes heart disease and cancer and all kinds of stuff, or they may be producing fertilizer that you need like vitamin K and stuff. And what determines what those bacteria produce is what you feed them. If you feed them meat, fish, fowl, eggs, and dairy products, you get the kind of bacteria that live in people eating meat, fish, fowl, eggs, and dairy products, and good luck to you. If you feed them whole plant foods, you get the kind of bacteria that live in people that are on whole plant food diets. And that tends to be the type of organisms associated with longer life and better health. Think about it. Just in your intestinal tract, there's about 5 pounds of creatures. These are living organisms living around in your digestive system, more than 1 trillion creatures, eating, breathing, drinking, and pooing inside you. And what they poo in you is determined by what you feed them. I suggest you feed them whole plant foods and stop feeding them animal foods and highly processed foods. You'll have the right organisms, you'll get the right poo, and you'll end up probably living a longer and healthier life as a consequence.
Thank you. What are your thoughts on a bunch of different things, such as 1, alcohol, 2, coffee, 3, tea, 4, vinegar, those 4 things: alcohol, coffee, tea, and vinegar, in terms of health?
Well, we know that alcohol is toxic and it promotes pretty much cancer in every single organ system in the body. I love a good glass of wine, so it's all about moderation, but I know Alan will argue about that, but not good, not good. No amount of alcohol is safe. That's the actual truth. I wrote a book on the Mediterranean diet, and even with all of that said, it's not a health promoting food by any means. About coffee and tea, I talked about today. There's more and more evidence supporting these wonderful things about coffee. I mean, I'm drinking tea, I drink coffee, all of the phytonutrients, the chlorogenic acid. There's some really promising benefits to consuming coffee and tea, and in different ways. And I think that it's a wonderful food. It's what you add to the coffee or tea that can be problematic. Vinegar, lots of wonderful benefits on vinegar. Add them to your salads. Don't eat it whole. Include it in your dressings and sauces, and it's a wonderful food to incorporate as well.
So some of the vinegars that are used today are more soda pop vinegars. If they've got more than 10 calories per tablespoon, you know that what they call it grape mist, it's sugar that's added to it. Sometimes 1 tablespoon of vinegar will have 2 or 3 times as many calories as the entire salad, just because of the amount of sugar that they're putting in there. So if you're going to use vinegar, you probably want to just use vinegar and not necessarily the ones that are sweetened excessively, the soda pop vinegars. Tea and coffee. I wouldn't have any problem with tea if you can eat the plant comfortably. So your mint and all your mild stuff. As far as caffeine, though, I see it as a highly addictive nervous system stimulant, much like alcohol. So I don't recommend that we take things that you can become addicted to, like caffeine and alcohol. What was the other thing?
Alcohol, coffee, tea, and vinegar.
Yeah. So, again, it's not the vinegar that's the problem, but it's the stuff they put in the vinegar in order to make it taste like soda.
Okay, you recommend an SOS-free diet, salt, oil, sugar. So if someone says, totally with you, I'm not having any sugar, what I use now is I use monk fruit, lucuma, yacon root syrup, maple syrup, honey, agave, and molasses.
Right.
How are they, what do you,
So
when you say no sugar,
something,
what do you?
yeah, something being less bad doesn't make it good. So honey is twice as sweet as sugar, so you would need less of it in order to approximate the taste. But my first question would be, what are you eating that you need to sweeten? The truth is, on an ideal whole plant food diet, we wouldn't have to be processing foods to the point where we've just eliminated their natural flavors and have to be sweetening them. Most people that are sweetening, grain products that they processed excessively, and they're trying to make something that will appeal to you after you've already eaten and don't really have any appetite left. So it has to be ultra stimulating. I would suggest avoiding sweeteners. Now, again, is honey less bad than sugar? Sure, because there'll be less of it. Unless you're a child and get botulism and die because of it. So with the little infants, you don't want to be feeding them honey. I think even the standard sources of advice caution against children's exposure to honey. But in any case, the point is that the principle is eat foods that are whole foods, not processed foods, and you won't need to be sweetening them in order to be able to enjoy them.
1,000,000%. And then also, you can go with the World Health Organization recommendations. You want to keep it under 5%, or they say 10% of total calories, added sweeteners. But the truth is that you could really shift your palate if you get away from them. And that's what's so extraordinary, is that if you're coming from a standard Western diet, it's like they can't imagine not having anything sweet. So then you can, what you could do, and what I do with my clients is I taper it down. So you're going from, especially like artificial sweeteners, which are hundreds or thousands of times sweeter than table sugar, and I take those away first, and then we start adding things like whole food sweeteners, like I would use date syrup, but that's my favorite sweetener of choice, or fruits by themselves, or fruit purees if I'm baking or cooking something with that. In my dressings and sauces, I use those things, and then you're all of a sudden that starts to taste sweeter and sweeter and sweeter, and then myself included, and I've watched hundreds of people through this. All of a sudden things get too sweet, and sometimes even fruit becomes like really, really sickeningly sweet sometimes. So your palate will shift if you give it the opportunity to do so and stick with it.
We actually did a study on that, on taste neuroadaptation. We showed that the literature is clear. If you go on a low salt diet, it takes about a month to neuroadapt to a low salt diet. If you go on a low fat diet, it takes about 3 months to satiation adapt to a lower fat intake. With fasting, it happens very rapidly. And what's interesting is people come in and the whole natural foods are disgusting, tasteless swill. And then by the time they're done fasting, they're not bad. And they'll eat the chard and think, oh my gosh, you're putting salt on the chard. It's the same chard. It's just now you can detect it. And we've shown that in our study that the actual detection of salt and sweet changes, and it changes quite rapidly with fasting, to where you can detect minimum threshold to salt and sugar at a lower temperature. And the hedonic response to food changes, just like you're explaining, that good foods start to taste good, and that the foods you used to like are overstimulating, and you don't need that level of stimulation anymore. But that never happens as long as you keep putting salt or salt substitutes and phony sugars and concentrated sweeteners on things. If you just get away from it all, let your body neuroadapt, all of a sudden you like fresh fruit and you like vegetables, and you don't need all that highly processed fractionated crud. And then the other thing that happens that people don't appreciate is when you eat sugars, even some of these natural sweeteners that are concentrated, your insulin levels go up, it drives your blood sugar down, now you get cravings. And a lot of this cravings and binging and problem people are having controlling what they put in their mouth is because they're screwing up their biology with hyper-concentrated sweeteners that's affecting their insulin response. And so, one of the things that we see with fasting is it reduces insulin resistance, and now the diabetics can function without the medication, and the people that are having addiction to cravings and binging and all this problem gets to be a lot more controllable because they're not fighting biology, they're just left fighting psychology.
Here's a weird fun fact. This is a total anecdote, but I've noticed with my clients repeatedly, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this. One dose, especially after they've been off the hyperpalatable foods, I've seen one dose, one serving, one pizza, one last a week, increased in
Yeah.
appetite and cravings.
That's because they're addicts. It's just the same thing with alcoholics. They're artificially stimulated to dopamine production in their brain that comes from the artificial chemicals added in their food, the salt, oil, and sugar. If you take an alcoholic and you say, oh, a little bit won't hurt, or just have some beer on the weekend, the next thing they know, they're waking up naked under the Golden Gate Bridge, wondering how they got there. And the same thing happens with people that have vulnerabilities. If they have a little bit, then it leads into a cascading cycle. Now, can some people have a drink and not become a drunk? Sure. But if you're an alcoholic, it's not you. Can some people have a chunk of cheese and a bit of chocolate cheesecake and whatever and not get into craving? Sure, there are people like that. But if you're overweight, it's not you. If you could have controlled it, you would have controlled it. You can't and you don't, so you got to stop lying to yourself and stop putting the chemicals in your mouth that are fooling your brain. If you're an alcoholic, the only answer turns out to be figure out a strategy to not drink. And if you're struggling with weight, the best strategy is go on a whole plant food SOS-free diet and figure out a way to stop fooling your brain with these chemicals that lead to the cyclic problems that you're having that are making you fat and sick.
What about stevia? Is that an exception or is that similar to the others?
No. Same principle. Because it's lower caloric density, you may not get fat eating the stevia itself, but the consequence of the stevia in the food that you're putting it is still going to lead to the same issues. Lack of neuroadaptation to healthy diets, overeating of the more concentrated foods. I just tell people if they really want to know if they should have something, all they have to do is get very quiet and go inside themselves and say, do I really, 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 really want whatever it is? And if the answer is truly yes, they know they can't have it. They get nothing.
Is there... Go ahead.
The stevia and all of those artificial sweeteners or naturally whatever you want to call them, they're hundreds or thousands of times sweeter than table sugar. So what it does is it raises that threshold of desire for sweetness. And my clients that can't get off of this stuff of sweet and craving, the cravings for the sweet are driven by all of those, all of them the same.
Which is great if you're a food manufacturer because you put these chemicals in the food and then you can supersize the people. And then as they get bigger and bigger, they can eat more and more.
Is there any clear information on how to prevent dementia, Alzheimer's, and memory loss?
Well, we know at least part of dementia is a progression of atherosclerosis. And we also know that it's tied to oxidative damage in the brain. So you want to start thinking, like, for example, in rats, these are genetically bred rats in a cage, exactly the same, fed exactly the same, except that half the rats are given a wheel where they can exercise. The rats that exercise don't get dementia. And they said, why? What is it about exercise that keeps those rats from developing dementia? And they found out that one huge difference is that rats that exercise have much higher levels of BDNF. BDNF is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor protects the brain from oxidative damage. So even if the rat's being given the rat chow that promotes oxidative damage, if they have high BDNF with exercise, it mitigates the damage so that they don't get dementia. And it turns out there's two things that increase BDNF levels, exercise and also fasting. And if you take those same rats and you periodically fast them, they live twice as long. You double their lifespan. And so they're realizing that a lot of the changes that occur with exercise also occur with fasting, which seems not obvious because, in fasting, you're resting, exercise, you're vigorous. Why would these both have the same effects? And the reason is probably because both exercise and fasting undo the consequence of dietary excess. And it's dietary excess that leads to fat, that leads to visceral fat, that leads to inflammation. The inflammatory products are what cause the dementia, the oxidative damage in the brain and the dementia. So anything you do to get rid of visceral fat and to reduce inflammation is likely to have an ameliorative effect. And that is true with exercise. It's true with fasting. It's true with eating a whole plant food SOS-free diet. So if you'll find the likelihood of dementia in patients that are raised on a healthy diet is going to be much less than people that are on a pro-inflammatory oxidative damage diet. Smoking cigarettes, drinking alcohol, all these things that lead to pro-oxidative damage are going to increase your odds, not just of dementia, but dementia is included.
If someone is perfectly healthy, how often would you recommend they do a fast with you? Once a year, once every 2 years, once every 5 years? How often?
Well, that's a really good question. We recommend actually that everybody fast every day for between 12 and 16 hours. That we recommend they not eat 3 to 4 hours before they go to sleep at night, and that they limit their feeding window to that 8 to 12 hours, during which time they exclusively eat whole plant foods. Now, we also recommend that periodically, and depending on the patient may determine the duration of the period and the periodicity, that maybe once a year for a week, they do a proper medically supervised fast, during which time we can assess both the benefit of fasting, but also you can use it diagnostically. If you can fast for a week, everything's stable, that's a pretty good sign. And that's what I do. That's what my staff does. We fast for a week a year. If everything is good, we're done. If not, we'll continue to fast long enough to resolve whatever the problems that might show up. We're going to be doing a study, though, trying to determine non-invasive biomarkers to determine who should fast, how long should they fast, when are they done fasting. Right now, the pharmaceutical industry is recognizing that fasting produces very many beneficial things, and they're trying desperately to come up with what are called fasting mimicking drugs. So drugs that'll mimic the effect that fasting has on the body, but without the nasty fasting in a form in a pill that they can sell. So how often should they do it? We don't know. Our recommendation right now, without research to support it, is, maybe once a year or every other year, take some time off, do a fast, make sure you do it resting, and you're a good candidate for it. And we think that that will be an enhancing benefit. We're going to actually do a navigator study where we're going to track 2,000 people the rest of their life and try to determine, does eating a whole plant food diet and periodically fasting help people not only live longer, but more importantly, live better. We're most interested in healthy life expectancy, not life expectancy. How long you live, honestly, is probably mostly luck and genetics. But how well you live in the time you're alive is largely determined by diet and lifestyle. And what we're trying to show is that a whole plant food SOS-free diet can help people avoid the last 20 years of debility that are so dominating in most people. For many people, the last 20 years of their life are pain and suffering. What we're expecting is that people that live healthily, the last 20 years of their life can be the most enriching, the most enjoyable, the best part of their life.
How often do you do a 1 week or longer fast?
Every year.
Okay. If anyone would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. So next question is, what do each of you eat each day, and what supplements do you each take each day?
I'll go first because, it's always going to look bad after Alan. I usually eat the same things. I definitely have been doing time restricted eating. I really do love to eat once a day. That's my sweet spot. I'm very happy eating a big, healthy, hearty meal around 11 o'clock, and then I'm good for the day. But sometimes because of social reasons, I end up eating a second meal. But in either 1 or 2 meals, I always have an enormous salad with all sorts of different colorful things, lots of leafy greens. And today it was Brussels sprouts, and I made some cooked broccoli to put on top, and I made a nacho cheese sauce to drizzle on top. I usually have some kind of legume or chickpea, or sometimes once in a while a tofu or tempeh. But or I usually have like whatever super stew I've made, and I kind of just put that on I always put everything into one giant bowl. I don't know why, I just like to have everything all together. But it's always just a combination of different veggies, soup, stews. Are my favorite recipes still are cream of mushroom cauliflower rice, and my let's see, what else do I normally make? The herb Dijon potato salad, just a recipe that I make a big salad, a big recipe, and a dressing, and I kind of like just throw that all in a bowl.
So I'm fortunate because I work at the True North Health Center, so we have these fabulous chefs and the food's always available, but I always have pretty much the same thing. Some kind of fruit salad. It'll vary depending on the season, what's in season, with lots of greens and maybe some kind of grain like oatmeal or corn or something like that. I have 2 huge salads a day at lunch and dinner, 2 large platters of steamed vegetables, and some kind of complex carbohydrate. It varies: beans, rice, potatoes, rice pasta, whatever. And so I'm usually eating 2 or 3 meals a day because it's hard with as much low density food as I eat, the salad and the steamed vegetables, to get enough calories in order to sustain my high energy output. So I'll eat in an 8-hour window, 2 or 3 meals, lots of salad, 1 meal based on fruit, and enough grains or beans so I don't disappear. I have up to an ounce of nuts a day. I take B12. I take 1,000 micrograms of B12 a day, and out of summer, I'll take 2,000 units of vitamin D.
Oh yeah, supplements. I take a multi that has 150 micrograms of B12 every day and 2000 IU of D, 150 micrograms of iodine, some zinc. And I take mushroom caps for my immune system. I seem to really like them, like a blend of mushrooms. And sometimes I go in and out of a probiotic I've been playing with that over the years. And yeah, I think that's it. Omega 3s. I take omega long chain EPA and DHA microalgae subs once in a while.
So, Juliana, you just threw us a curveball that I didn't think of, and really no one else has said. You just threw in that you're only eating one meal a day, and you're eating it earlier in the day. So you're basically saying you're not eating dinner. So I didn't even know this was an option. So can you explain more about this? Is this safe? Can we just have a big lunch? I mean, somehow I'm brainwashed to thinking that I have to have dinner at 6 o'clock. And if I don't, somehow I'm going to disappear and I won't get enough nutrients. So please tell us more about this.
Yeah, so don't try this at home necessarily. I don't necessarily recommend it. Most of my clients prefer 2 meals a day because I do like to keep them at 2 meals versus I don't even like to use the window anymore because a lot of my clients, once they start, don't like to stop. And so once they break the seal, it's like it's hard for them to turn it off. So it's like it's easier just to have 2 meal times. For me, I do like to have a big salad, big meal, and I'm just not hungry at night. Sometimes if I am, I will have like your fruit salad. That will be my evening thing. I've been really into apples lately, so I'll have a big, huge mound of apple slices or berries or whatever kind of fruit things. But I'm usually not hungry in the evening. I've trained myself. Now, what I've really learned is how incredible the circadian clock is and how there's this kind of like interesting phenomenon associated with the circadian rhythms where like, if you eat at the same time every day, your body will be hungry at the same time every day. And so I eat every day at 11 a.m. and then I'm really not that hungry the rest of the day. And if I am, I'll definitely eat. And you have to
The
make sure
reality, though, is there's a certain amount of calories that you have to get in to maintain optimum weight. You eat a little bit more concentrated diet than I eat, so you're able to do it in a shorter window. If you're eating lots of salad at 100 calories a pound, lots of steamed vegetables at 300 calories a pound, you can't eat the volume that you would need to sustain work. By eating a little bit more concentrated food, a little higher proportion of grains and beans, you can, narrow your feeding window. And that may work great. There's variations. It's what's going to work. You don't probably burn nearly as many calories as I burn. I play, 3 hours, 4 times a week of basketball. My caloric output is going to be higher. So if I was trying to live on salad, I wouldn't do it 1 meal a day. That I would disappear into the. So again, you have to modify your frequency, intensity, and diet based on the needs of the individual that you're talking about.
Yes, thank you. Exactly. Thank you for clarifying that. Yes, and when I'm more active, when I am going to the gym and doing an hour and a half workout or whatever, I definitely need that second meal in the day. So I really do try to listen to my body, but you're right. You have to, and you use the weight. That's what I do. It's like you use your weight to modify. Like if I'm losing weight, I know I need to eat more. If I'm gaining weight, I know I need to eat less. And that's a good way to kind of just temper.
There's also differences between males and females. Females biologically are energy serving fat storage devices. They have high estrogen levels, are designed to be more efficient. They are much more efficient on average than males. So that, for example, if a woman and a husband and wife go on a diet together and they eat exactly the same, they're both being careful, right? The woman will lose an average of about 2 pounds a week. A male will lose about 3 pounds a week if they're overweight. So about 50% more. And that's the guys usually out there going to In-N-Out Burger and cheating and doing all kinds of stuff. So if you're a woman, you have to work twice as hard to get half the results because you're full of estrogen, which is a fat storage hormone. If you take that same estrogen and inject it into males, they grow breasts and get hips and add fat. If you fill women with enough testosterone, their fat will melt off them. But they'll, of course, get hairy and get cancer and die. So it's probably not a good weight loss strategy. But the thing is, there are differences biologically between men and women. There's differences between people that are 20 years old and 80 years old. There's difference for people that are out doing hard manual labor versus people that sit at a desk and are not as active. So you have to take all of those things into account when you start talking about quantity and quality of food intake.
Amy, would you like to ask a question, and where are you from?
Hi, yes, I'm from San Diego, and I would love to come to North. That'd be awesome. You guys are doing a great job. What about people who are afraid of fruit combining with their vegetables and all of that? What do you think of that?
So food combining originally was designed as a way to help people not overeat. And if you're, if you're eating foods you shouldn't be eating, you may get less sick if you keep the meal simple than if you combine those foods. If you combine lots of different foods that are highly concentrated, it might help you not overeat. But if you're limiting your diet to whole plant foods, the food combining issues, other than as a dietary control issue, have less relevance. And in some cases, things like fruit, particularly the hybridized big balls of sugar that we get today that have nothing to do with normal fruit, if you include greens with your fruit, many people find they get better digestion, they have less fermentation issues, there's less tendency to overeat. Because the fruits that we eat today, if you go to like Hawaii and find wild apples, they resemble more our vegetables than these things that we've grown that are big sugar bowls. And so, I would encourage people to, even with their fruit, eat a lot of greens and you may find that you'll do a lot better. And stick to whole fruit, not so much the juices and all the dried fruits and all the highly processed fruits. Whole fruits, particularly modern whole fruits, plenty concentrated.
Great. Thank you. You guys are doing super. I really love this. All of the podcasts. Thank you.
Myra, would you like to ask a question, or where are you from?
Yes, I'm from Florida, and I'd like to ask Julieanna a question. She mentioned, and in her book, I saw that she says that her clients lose between 4.4 to 0.8 ounces of fat per day. How does she know that that's fat and not just like water weight or fluid, or like, how does she know that?
A great question. My clients, I can generalizably say that my clients can lose 0.4 to 0.8 pounds a day, which is very close to what you can get with fasting alone, but it's with food, and it's over time. So we're looking at body scans and stuff like that, but mostly it's over time. The first week's few days, especially, and then depending on how obese the client is starting at, they're definitely losing a lot more fluids at first, but it tempers off on account the amount of weight lost per day over the period of time. So weeks into it, it's been very predictably so 0.4 to 0.8 pounds a day. And then when we compare it with body mass, we could see the difference.
We've actually done DEXA scanning studies where in relation to fasting, we were able to show that, people lose a bunch of weight fasting and then they regain weight when they come off. The weight they lose when they're fasting is water, protein, glycogen, fiber, and fat. But the weight they gain as they come off the fast is limited to water, fiber, protein, and glycogen, not fat. The fat continues to drop as long as they're eating a whole plant food diet. And if you look at them 6 weeks post-fasting, their actual lean mass as a percentage of their body is higher than it was at baseline. The bone density is not affected. What continues to lose, even as they're regaining weight, is they continue to lose fat, and preferentially visceral fat. For example, a male that lost 20% of their total body fat during 15 days of fasting also lost 55% of their total visceral fat. So visceral fat, which really shouldn't be there, is preferentially mobilized during fasting. And the lean tissue, they lose 4% of lean tissue. By the end of 6 weeks, they have a higher percentage of lean tissue than they did when they started. So it's a way of actually transforming the body. The old wives' tales that, you lose weight and you just gain it back, not true. The key is whole plant food, SOS-free diet, and moderate activity. And if you do that, whether you have fasting or not, you're going to lose a predictable amount of weight, and most of that's going to be preferentially fat.
Janet, would you like to ask a question, or where are you from?
Yes, I'm from Maryland, and I was just wondering, for weight loss, how much water do each of you recommend that a person drink a day? Because a lot of times I don't hear a lot of talk about the importance of drinking water. And I was just wondering what each of you thought about that.
So water's encouragement is mostly because people are on high protein, high sulfur amino acid diet. So if you're trying to neutralize the toxic waste of eating a dead, decaying flesh diet, you probably can't drink enough water. On these high water content diets, it's going to be more variable, because when you eat as much fruit and vegetables as we're advocating, you get lots of water from the diet, in addition to the water you drink from free water. What you might want to look at more is how much are you peeing? So you should be peeing 2 to 3 liters of water a day, and it shouldn't be overly concentrated. If your urine's overly concentrated, you might want to drink more water or include more fluid by eating more fruit and vegetables. People eating enough fruit and vegetables, short of exercising and losing fluid that way, may not need to drink as much as a person that's, eating a more concentrated diet. And also, just as a little experiment, if you ever go out to a restaurant and you're eating your food, if you're eating healthy food, you're not going to be thirsty. But when you're eating highly salty food, you're gonna find yourself very thirsty. If you're having a drink with your meals, it means you're either not chewing your food or you're eating the wrong food. Because these diets, when you put these together, typically are very high water content diets. And so you can maintain adequate fluid intake without necessarily drinking 28 glasses of water a day or whatever.
Right, and then the
Okay.
going just guideline, just to have it in your head, just to look at, just to think about, because all of that is the most important parts. But what we use as a recommendations in the dietetic school, right, is you use your weight in pounds divided in half in ounces per day. So if you're 120 pounds, you're drinking 60 ounces of water a day. But the other thing that I just talked about in my last talk, but it grosses me out so much, but it's such a great indicator, is that what I was also taught in grad school is you want your urine to look like lemonade, not apple juice. Now, I don't ever drink lemonade or apple juice after hearing that, but it's a great way to know if it's dilute enough,
Sure.
not too concentrated, just as a guideline.
Yeah.
And if you're exercising more, if you're pregnant, if it's hot out, all these different variables are going to affect how much water you need to consume. But again, you could use those as just kind of guideposts.
Also, thirst becomes more reliable when you stop poisoning the body with artificial sweeteners and salts and all these processed foods. So you can use thirst becomes a more reliable indicator. But it is true, dehydration is a problem. It causes a lot of symptoms. Sometimes just getting people drinking more water can help alleviate a lot of their symptoms.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So the final question would be, do you watch TV? And if not, what are the healthiest habits or health protocols aside from exercising and healthy eating that you have?
What is a TV? What's the segue from the TV?
The first question is, do you watch TV?
Oh,
And then aside from, so just question is, do you watch TV? And aside from exercise and healthy eating, what are your healthiest habits or healthy protocols that you personally follow?
I don't watch a lot of TV. I watch some TV, but very, very rarely, only just to, keep my boyfriend comfortable and comfy. And I love reading, and I love podcasts, and I love socializing and seeing friends and family, and I love traveling. And those are kind of things that I try to build into part of my things that I love to do that are, I think, healthy, meditating, stuff like that.
So for me, I have limited activities. I play basketball 4 times a week. That's my main recreational and exercise. I watch a show each night with my wife that she selects as a part of our evening ritual. And I honestly spend almost all my time working.
Right. Do you each want to just take a minute to leave us with any final thoughts or comments?
Like I said before in the talk, I want everyone to think that it doesn't have to be perfect. There is literally no such thing as a perfect diet. Nothing, you should not strive for perfection. And all these decisions you make that you've heard in this conference to just eat more whole plants, eat less frequently, take care of yourself and your mental well-being will really do a lot for you long-term, but to not give yourself so much pressure and to remember radical self-compassion. And you are human after all, and we're dealing with a very, very, very unhealthy food environment, and standing in your truth is really important and really difficult, but it's worth it in the long run.
Thank you.
So I'd say, eat a whole plant food diet that's SOS free, get some exercise, plenty of sleep, and try to only worry about the things you might be able to do something about, and just put aside all the other stuff that's out there stressing people out.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Goldhamer, how do we follow up with you if we're interested in coming to True North and anything and staying in touch with you and consultations? What's the best way?
TrueNorthHealth.com.
Okay. And do you do phone consultations for people that just want to ask questions? And
yeah, we offer a free conversation with me. If they fill out the registration forms, I'll review their medical history, try to point them in the right direction.
Okay, great. And Julieanna, how do people follow up with you? Do you offer Zoom consultations and phone consultations?
Yes, I work exclusively online, virtually, and by phone. So you could find me at plantbaseddietitian.com, and you could email me directly via the contact button over there on the upper right.
Okay, thank you so much. And can we unmute so everyone has a chance to thank them as well?
Fantastic.
Thank you.